Hey everybody, this is Armand, and today I'm bringing you a video about intermediate rhythms and intermediate standard notation. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over a little more detailed ways of writing out rhythms, because we didn't go over all of them before. We just went over the basic ones, and now we're also going to go over other common type notations on the standard notation of music. It sounds a little redundant, but what I mean is there's different symbols and different ways of writing things on standard notation, and I have not gone over them yet because they're a little more advanced. So now we're going to go over those. Also, I'm going to place a link in the sidebar. This is going to be the link to Wikipedia, and they have a full list of everything you will ever see on a piece of music. So if you so happen to run across something I don't go over, you can always reference to there. But for the most part, I'm going to be avoiding certain ones just because I haven't run across them, and on certain instruments, you just won't see those things. For instance, you won't see a half sharp on a piano because you cannot achieve a half sharp. Everything is in half steps on a piano, not quarter steps. So without further ado, we will now commence with the lecture. Now, you've probably seen this picture before in the first video of mine where we went over the basic rhythms and the basic types of notes and rests. Well, I'm sure you realize that not all of these cover the bases that you might need for writing a music note duration. So what we're going to discuss now is called the dotted note. The dotted note is a very simple concept. It simply means that for the note value written, you can multiply that note value by 1.5. So a quarter note turns into 3/8 notes worth of value, or a count and a half. A whole note would turn into 6 beats. A half note would turn into 3 beats. And we also have something called a double dotted note. The double dotted note is just another way of expressing another half added on to the note. This does not mean half of the actual note value. This means a half of the note value. So a quarter note would be a quarter note plus an eighth note plus a 16th note. So then its value is a little more complex than just what it would seem. I'm not going to write an example of this since it's not very common to see this, but hopefully you understand the concept of the math behind this. What you're looking at right now is an example measure in which I've completed the phrase because it says 4/4. That means there need to be 4 quarter notes in this measure for it to be complete. So there need to be the equivalent of 4 quarter notes. Since we have 1.5 quarter notes first, then we have an eighth note and 2 more quarter notes. That adds up to being 4 quarter notes as far as we're counting. But what the music rhythm would be for this would be like tick, 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 tick. And you would follow that along with your metronome. It's just you would in your head you would have to count this as 1, 2, and 3, 4 in order to follow the measure. Now some of you might be thinking, well Armand, what if I have a note and it is longer than 1 measure long, or it starts at the end of 1 measure and I want to keep counting that note or keep playing that note thereafter? Well, the way you notate that is what we call a tie note. And what you'll do is you'll put this little arc between that and the next measure, and you will just complete the amount that needs to be in that measure. Like, so if you have 3 of your beats filled in this measure and you want to have the 4th beat start a note, you would just put that 4th beat in, and then you would put a tie over to the next measure, and you can tie over for as many measures as you want. What we have now on the screen is an example of a tied note between a quarter note and a whole note between measures 1 and 2. So for measure 1, you would count out your first 3 beats, as you see, and then when you get to the 4th beat, you would play that 4th note, but you wouldn't hold it for just a quarter note value. You would actually hold it for 5 counts because it is tied into a whole note. So the whole note is worth 4, and the quarter note is worth 1, therefore you hold your note for the total of 5 beats. But you can actually mix and match with whatever you like. The tie note is usually used between measures for longer notes, and you can use your dotted notes inside of measures. Another notation that looks very similar to the tied note is the slur. The slur is the same kind of curved bar between notes or among notes as you see here, and what it means is to legato between the notes. Legato is where you play between the notes before releasing the previous one. You play the next one on piano, or on guitar it usually means a slide. So instead of hitting a note and then just moving to the next, like dun dun dun, you'd go dun dun dun. You will notice in this picture that the last note, the C, has its stem pointing downwards, whereas the first three, the G, A, and B, have their stems pointing upwards. This is strictly to allow for room on the page where the stem can go. If all of them pointed upwards, then the bass clef would get in the way of the treble clef, and if all of them pointed downwards, then the treble clef would get in the way of the bass clef. So it's strictly just an aesthetics type of thing. The next type of notation I'll talk about is the staccato note. Staccato is not to be confused with a dotted note, although it does have a dot, but the dot is located either below or above the note. And what you do is when you see a staccato note, you simply hit the note or pluck it very quickly and do not let it ring at all. So instead of hitting a note and it being dump, this would be dump, and you would not let it ring. This does not necessarily mean accent the note either. Alright, now the next thing I'm going to talk about is going to be called dynamics. This is what you write on your paper when you want someone to play louder or softer, or gradually louder or gradually softer, or immediately very loud or immediately very soft. You know, these type of things. The dynamics is just how loud or how soft you're playing at the moment. What you see now is just a list of the different types of markings, not all of them, that you may see at the beginning of your piece of music or at the beginning of measures. What they mean is from the bottom to top, that is quiet to extremely loud. The most common ones you'll see are piano and forte, which means quiet and loud, and forte fortissimo means extremely loud, and pianissimo means very quiet, usually at as quiet as you can play or as loud as you play respectively. These are the last few dynamic symbols I'm going to talk about. The first one is sforzando, which means suddenly very loud. And this is generally used in a section where it will have been piano, very soft, for a while, and then the composer will want you to be very loud and emphasizing on that portion. Sometimes it will be immediately followed by another piano, which means very quiet, as we've stated. The accent is just for the note that is written under, and it's just that little greater than sign. It just means for that single note. You do not accent any more notes except for the one labeled accented. And that just means play it with emphasis. The crescendo means to get louder, starting at the period where the tip of it is, and stop getting louder at the end of it. Sometimes there'll be a dynamic marking at the beginning or end of it. And the diminuendo is the opposite. It means to get quieter for the portion of the symbol. As many of you have probably heard of the word triplet, what you see on the screen is the notation for a triplet grouping. The 3/4 notes are actually equivalent to the space in time of 2/4 notes, but they are counted as follows. I'm going to snap a beat, so tick, 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 tick. And that's how you would read this. They're they're a little bit quicker because they're 3 in the space of 2. And that's exactly what they are. They are 3 beats in the space of 2, and that's about it. This is what is called a trill. It just is a TR with a little squiggly next to it, and that means you hit that note, but you alternate quickly back and forth between that note and an adjacent note. Sometimes it will be marked which actual adjacent note, but usually it's understood that it's the one note up above that. Before I finish here, I'd like to make a mention of what a fermata is. A fermata is the little eyeball-looking thing above the note you see. This strictly means hold it for a longer period of time than the actual note value, but you are actually to determine how long that is. Well, everybody, that's about all the time I can really cram into this video. There's one more topic I wish I could have had more time to discuss, and that is repetition and codas. If you actually go to the link on the sidebar, you'll be able to visit this. It's closer to the end of the page, but I think it's pretty important, especially for piano music. It involves repeating back to the beginning of a piece or to a certain area, and then after repeating maybe a few times, going back to a different section or like an alternate pathway. This might become useful to a few of you in writing music. But I hope you've learned something, and I guess I'll see you in the next video if you want to learn how to write scales and understand the circle of fifths. Thanks for watching.